Hey there, this is John from Heroes and Legends, and welcome to part 3 of our 6-part Conspiracy Take the Crown full set review. Today we're going to look at all the black cards and some of the multicolor cards. If you've been watching the channel, you know a couple days ago we looked at all the white cards, yesterday the blue. Tomorrow we'll be back with the red, Friday green, and then Saturday morning we'll finish things up with all the colorless spells. So we're working our way through the set. Before we get into the actual set review, just a quick reminder, if you check out the description below, you'll find some links to Conspiracy products on Amazon. And if you happen to be in the market to pick some Conspiracy up and you do it through those links, it actually has a small percentage of the value go back towards the channel. So if you have a chance to look at those, I really appreciate it. I know not everybody can afford to do Patreon or something like that, so I wanted to come up with another way that folks could also support the channel while they're shopping and buying their cards anyway. So hopefully that will help a little bit. And having said that, let's talk about black as a color. Now, first off, this has a lot of enters the battlefield effects. So it does play pretty well with blue, which has some bounce effects that you can bounce sometimes your own creatures and get some value out of it. It also has a lot of discard effects and probably the best removal in the whole set. You want to talk about economical removal at the common level, you're looking at this color right here, and you're going to see that as we get going. So black brings a lot to the table. I think it'll be a pretty strong color in general, especially in the late game. It can probably go a long way to wrapping up a game. So having said that, let's get into the actual cards. We're going to begin first with the new cards in black, and the first one is a Conspiracy. It's Assemble the Rank and Vile, and this is part of a cycle. You've been seeing these all week as we've been talking about them, but this is the black common Conspiracy. And basically what you get here is, at first it's a trick when you flip it over, but then it stays on the command zone and allows you to use it repeatedly. But whenever one of your creatures dies, if you pay black, you get a 2/2 zombie. It comes into play tapped. It's actually pretty economical for what it is. I mean, Conspiracies don't cost anything really, so playing them is just upside for the most part. So yeah, this one is just fine. It's nothing super exciting, but it's nice value. Alright, next card is actually very interesting. This is maybe one of my favorite cards of the set, just because I think the design is just so elegant and really makes you think. The creature itself, incredibly economical. 5/4 flyer for 4. Phenomenal, right? But what do you have to do to get this thing? So first off, you have to draft it face up, which is actually probably upside, because it does tell everyone at the table, hey, I'm interested in drafting black, so if you're next to me, let's work things out so we have a smooth draft, right? And it gives that signal right open to everybody to see. Secondly, though, here's where it gets awkward. When you draft this thing, your next 3 packs, you can't look at the cards. You have to just draft a card randomly. And I made a joke when this was spoiled to call it the Magic the Gathering online draft when you lose your connection. But aside from that, that's a pretty big downside, because not only are you not seeing the information in the packs, but you're also just getting a random pick for the next 3 picks. Now, maybe you get lucky and you get a good card, but probably not, right? So you really have to decide when this is relevant to pick. This is probably not something you want to first pick, and then you're going to lose pick 2, pick 3, pick 4. That could be pretty major, right? You don't necessarily even want to pick this probably second. Even third feels shaky to me. Now fourth, I'm starting to feel a little bit better about it. But at the same time, if you pass this card, let's face it, it's not coming back. Because by the time you get down to 5, 6, 7, this is actually a pretty good pickup. Now, you have a decision to make, especially if you're in pack 3 and you just need an economical flyer and you happen to open this thing. Maybe you are giving up your next few picks to get this, just because you need it in your deck at that point. Where pack 1, you have a little more flexibility. You can just go into another color or something. So it does really make you think hard about what you're doing in a draft. And because of that design, I really like this card. Phenomenal card. It is a card that you could put in a cube. Could be interesting there too. Although the downside would be much bigger in a cube when you're playing with more powerful cards. Capital Punishment. Here's a Council's Dilemma card, and this one's a pretty strong one, and it plays well with some other cards in black that we'll see later, but basically, yeah, 6 mana, it's pretty affordable for what this thing's doing, and everybody's getting to vote on what the impact is going to be, so there'll be a lot of politicking involved, which is always kind of fun in a multiplayer game, so I do like that. But you get one vote, so you decide what's more important, if you want all your opponents to sack a creature or you want them to discard a card, and then from that point your opponents go ahead and decide their own fate beyond that. Again, this is a card that's probably better earlier in the game than later when you have less opponents and it can make less of an impact, but it's still very good, and it'll be kind of fun to see how people make that decision based on their board state versus everyone else's board states. I think this is an awesome card for Commander as well. I'd like to see this played in Commander, actually. Custodial Lich. It looks expensive at first, 5/4/4/2, but then look a little closer, you get the Monarch token, which means you're almost guaranteed a card draw at the end of the turn. Alright, I feel a little bit better, and also whenever you become the Monarch, target player sacrifices a creature. Okay, I feel a lot better now. 4/2, those are decent stats, it at least trades with something, plus I get the Monarch token, which means probably a card draw, and every time I get the Monarch token, and black is really all about finding ways to keep the token and send out death touch creatures to get the token. So whenever I get that token, I can force one of my opponents to sack a creature, so I get even more value. Yeah, this is actually pretty economical. It's a rare, you won't see it a lot, but it's definitely worth running in limited. Deadly Designs, another elegantly designed card, no pun intended, but I really like this. You pay 2 for this enchantment, and now any player can pay 2 to put counters on it, and once it gets to 5 counters, at that point you have to sacrifice it and destroy up to 2 creatures. So there's a lot of play that goes into this card. First off, there's politicking. You know what, I'll pay into that if you get rid of that creature, and then you can get rid of any other creature you want, for example, but we need to deal with that creature. That comes up. Or maybe I have a really good creature in my hand I want to play, and I really need to just pay into this to trigger it so that 2 other creatures get destroyed, and then I can play my good creature. So this is really awesome. Fantastic card for Commander yet again. Great in any multiplayer format. I really like this. Garrulous Sycophant. This one I'm not as excited about. When I first read it, I took it as it does 1 damage to everybody, and then you basically drain each point of life, but it's not really that. It does 1 damage to everybody, and you just gain 1 life. Having said that, it's not super good. I mean, it's a blocker if you want to slow things down, but there's just so many good cards in this set that you're probably not going to include this most of the time. If it gave you the Monarch token, that might be a little different, but it doesn't. It feels a little awkward, considering the effect only works when you have the Monarch token. So, I don't know. It's an odd one. Marchesa's Decree. Here's another one I'm not super excited about. Here's the purpose of this card. It's meant to put it down on the battlefield and then create a situation where players are just going to go attack somebody else just because it's easier. The only problem, though, is I don't think the drawback's strong enough for 4 to keep people from attacking you, quite honestly. Yeah, maybe in the early game it will work, but really just 1 point of damage for each creature attacking isn't that big of a deal. I mean, if they can get in for like 7-8 damage and take 3, they're going to do it, right? So yeah, it just doesn't feel like it has big enough impact. White is really the color that's all about putting down cards that make you feel like I don't want to bother attacking them. That's really their strength. This is just kind of almost like a side thought in black. Regicide, another really cool draft card, very elegant, simple name. I do like that, and it's good removal too. So when you're drafting, and I mentioned this in the last couple of videos a little bit, if you're new to drafting, you might not really have a grasp yet on signals and how to read signals and how to stay out of people's way in a draft. This is a card that helps teach those skills. You pick this card, you tell everyone, hey, I'm in black, I'm picking Regicide. Oh, and by the way, what colors are you not playing, player to my left and player to my right? And that really gives you an idea of how to smooth out your draft and hopefully stay out of each other's way. Really cool idea. Love this card, and let's face it, in a multiplayer situation especially, it's still good removal because you're going to have targets for it. Even if 3 of the colors are kind of off limits, you'll still be able to destroy something with relevance, and it's very, very cheap. Sadly, this card isn't playable if you're not drafting it, but you could put it in cube, so you could have another purpose for it there. Sinious Vermin. I like cards that are good early and good later in the game. This is one of them. It's a bear with upside. So early out, it smooths out your curve. Little 2-drop, 2/2, keeps people off your back. At the mid-level of the game, you can pour 5 mana into this, becomes a 5/5 menace. Yep, sign me up. This is a good beater, good creature. Smuggler Captain. This card can be a little awkward. It can be very good, but it can be also very awkward depending on how things go. This one's a little bit of a gamble. So you draft this. Again, you are giving information. You can say, hey, I'm drafting black. Now when you pick the next card to link with this, you could pick maybe the other color you're in and just say, hey, also I'm in blue, by the way. So that's kind of nice in the draft. And even that alone might be worth messing around with this a little bit, especially if it's a late pick. However, the downside is if you draw the card you've linked to this first and then draw this second, that's really not going to feel good because now you're going to have a 2/2 for 4. Now, granted, there's some ways around that. If you can draft a couple copies of this card, for example, you could then link 2 different cards, which increases your odds of getting a card that you can search for when you do play one of the copies. So you can smooth it out that way. I'm probably not going to play this if I just get one, just because the downside just feels a little too big for me. And there's just so many good cards in the set, I don't think I have to take that gamble. However, the upside is very good. And if there is something I want to link to it that's maybe really expensive, for example, it might be worth the risk. Or if I'm even in a situation where I want to link a card that's not a color I'm playing, again, it's very risky if you draw that card, but again, it could be something you want to try out, then yeah, it does have its place some of the time. Thorn of the Black Rose. Here's another Death Touch creature that's all about getting the crown and keeping the crown. You pay 4, it's a 1/3 Death Toucher. You also get the crown, which means you're probably getting a card draw at the end of turn, and the Death Touch is going to hopefully put you in a position where at times you'll be able to get the crown back because your opponent isn't going to want to block with maybe one of the really good creatures. So there's definitely a lot of play here. This one is a common too, so you'll see a fair amount of these going around. Alright, let's move on to the reprints that are in black. And we'll start off with Absorb Viz. I mean, not a super exciting card, but what makes this relevant is the basic land cycling. If you're going deep, maybe you're going 3 colors, maybe you're even going 3, splashing a 4th, you're going to need these basic land cycling cards. That's why you play this. Once you have your mana smoothed out, if you draw it, okay, at least it does something, right? That's the whole idea. But really, you're not playing this unless you're trying to smooth your mana. Alder's Reap. This is a cool card. Think of it this way, though. It's not really card advantage as much as it's just cycling. You cast this card, so you're cycling it once. You have to sacrifice a creature, so you're just really trading 2 cards for 2 cards. But it does let you get deeper in your deck, and what I do like is it's an instant. So if the creature's going to die anyway, then you feel like you're getting some value out of this card. I don't mind running one of these usually in my limited decks. Avatar of Woe. Now, this is an interesting reprint. It's a mythic this time around, and it's really good in a multiplayer situation. Not as good in one-on-one, but in multiplayer it's very, very strong. You can cast this probably mid-game in a lot of situations, especially the way that this game feels like it's going to move relatively quickly. And you get yourself a 6/5 with evasion, because it has fear, and you can also tap it to destroy creatures and they can't be regenerated. So much value to be had here. I really like this. This is a card that your opponents have to deal with, or it's going to run away with the game. It's not as good in one-on-one situations, so I don't really see this in cubes very often, but it's a good commander card. I have seen it played in commander. Blood Toll Harpy. Here's a enters battlefield effect that I mentioned earlier. This one's a simple one, but you do get a 2/1 flyer and everyone loses a life, so it's relevant enough, I think. It can be a nice little beater for you. So again, it's a common. They'll be around if you need them. They'll be a good card to help round out your 3-drop. Child of the Night, another good 2-drop actually, a 2/1 lifelinker. There are a lot of vampires in black too, but you'll notice that there isn't really a tribal element, even though you do see a lot of goblins, a lot of vampires. Other than maybe one white card that we looked at a couple days ago, there's nothing that really buffs tribes very much. But still, regardless, this is a good card, great 2-drop that's going to let you attack early and maybe gain a little bit of life if nothing else. Deathwind. Here's some common removal for black that's pretty good. You're going to see that as a trend as we keep going. But yeah, this is instant speed, classic removal. I mean, you do have to pump a little mana into it, but it deals with indestructible creatures, maybe some other hard to deal with creatures. Really good removal card for black, just very solid. Diabolic Tutor. So here's kind of the tutor of the set. Diabolic Tutor is a good one. Okay, I know it's not Demonic Tutor, and I think a lot of people want to see something like that get reprinted. Maybe we will in a future conspiracy. This time around, though, Diabolic Tutor is fine. It's going to be good for you in Limited. I've seen this played even in Commander, even though there's better choices out there. I have seen this card show up, and at least is affordable, if nothing else, for folks. And even some cubes will run it if they don't want to go too powerful with cards like Demonic Tutor. They'll run something like this. Driver of the Dead. There's definitely value to be had here. 3/2 for 4, but when it dies, you get to take a small creature back from your graveyard and put it into the battlefield. I always like effects that take things right into the battlefield. I'm very happy with that. It does make it a card that is very persistent and hard to deal with. And again, it's another incentive for someone to maybe just go mess with someone else instead of you. Bhagavan Flinger. I actually used this card a lot in Limited back in the day, believe it or not. I mean, on paper it doesn't look good. Like, I look at this and I'm like, did I really play this? But I did. It costs 5 for a 2/2, but that -2/-2 is actually kind of a big deal. Now, this is probably better in a one-on-one game than a multiplayer game, so honestly, I don't recommend playing like more than one of them in your deck, but I think you'll be pleasantly surprised by this card at times. Fester Gloom. This is a little awkward. Typically, I would say this is a card you'd want to sideboard in. However, multiplayer games, you don't sideboard, so you just kind of have to go with it. If you're not on a plan to play a lot of small creatures, having a one-of in your deck might not be a bad thing. It deals with certain situations you'll run into. White does have a little bit of token generation, so it does kind of host some of those strategies. The white small creature melee strategy could be set back by this. Fleshbag Marauder. Here's another enters the battlefield effect, and this is a pretty good one. So again, this is going to play really well with bounce spells in blue, and even one of the more notable mythics, Kia, would be amazing with some of these enter the battlefield effects. She's in Orzhov colors, of course. We looked at her a couple days ago. But yeah, this is a good card. It's always been a good card. It's better in multiplayer because it actually does affect all players, which is pretty cool. Next we have Ghoul Draw Spectre. I used to always kind of think of this as the poor man's Hypnotic Spectre, and it's decent in certain circumstances, but it costs 4 for a 2/2. It does have flying, which is nice. If any opponent is out of cards, it gets +3/+3, but let's be honest, there's just a lot of ways to draw cards in this set, and if an opponent sees that ability is on the battlefield, they may hang on to some lands or something, right? Now, on the flip side, there are some discard abilities in black, and it could potentially make somebody discard long enough for you to get some value out of this thing. And when it does attack in, it forces a player to discard, not at random, but at least choose a card and discard. So there's some value to be had here, but let's be honest, it's a 4-drop. There's a lot of really good 4-drops in this set, and I do feel like it's got a lot of competition. It's probably not always going to make the cut. Harvester of Souls. Good card if your opponents can't deal with it. This thing is a 5/5 for 6 with Death Touch. This is a beater that's going to get in there and take that Monarch token back whenever you lose it. And also that card draw ability is the real deal too in a multiplayer game. Whenever a creature dies, you're drawing a card. If your opponents don't deal with this, let's face it, you're going to be running away with the game here. Next is Infest. Again, this is another one of those cards I normally say could be a good sideboard card, but unfortunately we're not sideboarding. So you do have to make a decision if you're going to put this in your main deck. If you're not running a lot of small creatures, you might find some value. You could disrupt what your opponent's doing, especially if they're in white. However, it is a 3-drop. There may be other 3-drops that are more consistent that you could bank on a little better. So it could make the cut. I wouldn't say don't run a one-of this, but a lot of times you might have better stuff going on. Inquisition of Kozilek. Here's one of the big reprints of the day. Now, many of you are aware, of course, this card sees tons of play in Modern, and it was originally printed in Rise of the Eldrazi. It was an uncommon there. It did see one reprint in the Modern event deck, but that was a pretty relatively limited product anyway. And this card got up to about $20 or so. I actually at one point saw it up to $25. It came down slightly, but this is a very, very popular card. Now it's back, finally got reprinted. It's a rare though, but that's still better than nothing, right? I'm glad it's there. I'm glad they chose it to be reprinted. And here's what's kind of funny about this card for me. I feel like this would have made a lot more sense in Oath of the Gatewatch. I feel like that was the Kozilek set, but apparently from a storyline point of view, it didn't fit there. So they weren't able to include it there. So they were trying to find another place to include it. Now, quite honestly, it doesn't feel like a multiplayer card to me. This feels like a one-on-one card, like a very competitive one-on-one card. And it also doesn't make a whole lot of sense with this world being, Kozilek and Eldrazi, right? But at the same time, aside from all that, I'm glad they included it. I'm glad they just put it in there because this thing needed to be reprinted. It's the right thing to do for the players. I would have preferred to see it at Uncommon, quite honestly, but maybe it just would have been a little bit awkward considering it's not a fantastic multiplayer card. You don't want it to show up too much. But black does have some discard mechanics going on in this set, so I guess it sort of makes sense, but it's interesting. But glad it's there. At the end of the day, thank you, Wizards. Thank you for including it and getting more copies out there. It was much needed. Keepsake Gorgon. I used to play with this one a lot too back in Limited, and again, always pleasantly surprised. It's a 5-drop, but you get a 2/5 Death Toucher, and you know what? Later in the game, it gets a little bigger, but more importantly, it just becomes spot removal. That's actually pretty good. It's an uncommon. There'll be a few of these going around. You don't want to necessarily flood your deck with them, but a 1-of actually can be very good, I think. Mausoleum Turnkey. This card's kind of funny to me because it's sort of this awkward Gravedigger. Like you play it, it's Gravedigger, but you don't get to choose what goes back to your hand from your graveyard, an opponent does. But what's kind of fun about that is, there'll be some politicking going on if you pick somebody who kind of have an alliance with temporarily or something. There's value to be had here. I mean, Gravedigger is a good card. This maybe isn't quite as good. It won't always make your cut in the 4 spot, but it's definitely playable. Next we have Murder, one of the better removal spells in recent history. It was in Eldritch Moon. It's back again here. This time around it's a common. There's going to be plenty of these going around. And this is what I was talking about earlier with this and Deathwind. A lot of really strong instant spot removal cards for black. That makes black very formidable. I do think, again, black is a color that might be able to close out some games with some of these really strong removal spells. This one's no joke, and having it around a common, it's going to be everywhere. This will be very interesting to see how it plays out. Pyroxene Arena. This is a card that has had a pretty long history as being a very good card in Magic. It's been reprinted a few times, and it still runs about $5, $7, $8 to get a copy of it, so it's kind of cool to see it reprinted here. This is a great commander card, great cube card. This is a really awesome cube card, and it's going to be good for you in this format as well. I mean, multiplayer, sometimes it's a little weird because you do have to be cognizant of your life total, but I think there's enough going on in this particular format to keep the game moving that'll be okay. Public Execution. This is a card that when it was originally printed, I think it was Magic 2013 if I'm not mistaken. This thing was kind of a blowout in that format. It was a fast format. You could get rid of your opponent's best creature and then take their power down for a turn and just get in with a huge attack. It won't be quite as good here because it is a multiplayer game. You can't put your shields down like that. You'll be attacked by the other players. But late game, this could be a finisher. So again, running one of these, it costs 6, but throwing one of these in your deck probably won't be a bad thing by any means. Raise Dead. This plays really well with a lot of the entrance battlefield effects, and I like cards that allow me to trade freely. Sometimes I just like to trade off creatures knowing that I have ways to get them back, and this is a very cheap way to do that. This is a sorcery speed card, but it only costs 1. You get to just pick stuff back out of your graveyard, recast it, get some benefit from entrance battlefield effects. There's a lot you can do with this card in this particular set, and it's a common, so you'll see them floating around. Sangromancer. So this is actually a card that plays well with some of these discard effects and destruction effects, and it's a 3/3 flyer for 4, so economically it's a good card just on its own. It's a rare, you won't see it all of the time, but the fact is once this is in play, it's a good beater, and when you start destroying creatures with your spot removal, making people discard cards, you start gaining a fair amount of life. Works really well with Pyroxene Arena, for example. Now granted, it's another rare, that won't happen very often, but very good combo with those two cards. And this is another one of those cards that your opponents are going to kind of have to deal with. I do find it a little strange that this is rare, not uncommon, because it feels like this is like the linchpin card for what Black's trying to do, and you're just not going to see it all that often. However, at uncommon, that might have been a little too good and a little too frequent, possibly, so it probably will make sense at rare, but it's a good card. Definitely a good inclusion in Black. Shambling Goblin. It's a small 1-drop that is at least going to deter people from attacking you early in the game, or maybe deter people from blocking you early in the game. So yeah, as far as 1-drops goes, this is actually a pretty good one. Stromkirk Patrol. This is a good card, but I do think it's a little bit weaker in this format, considering it's multiplayer and attacking in with this card, even though, yes, you get the benefit of potentially getting the counter on it, does open you up for some retaliation from other players. So it's a little bit awkward at the 5-drop. If this costs 4, maybe I'd be on board a little more with this. It's fine, it's playable, but really at the 5-drop slot, there's probably better things most of the time you'll be able to put into your deck. Unnerve plays very well with the card we just saw a few moments ago. Makes everybody discard 2 cards. It's kind of like Mind Rot on steroids. It's just a really intense Mind Rot. But not every deck's going to want to do this. If you're more aggressive and less controlling, you're probably going to leave this out. But if you're trying to force your opponents to discard more often and try to win through attrition, then yeah, you can include it in your deck. It is a common, but this isn't a card you want too many copies of in the 4-drop spot. Alright, let's move on to some multicolor, and we have a reprint here. This is a Rakdos card, Carnage Gladiator, and this is a card that really works surprisingly well in a multiplayer game. So first off, it's a 4/2 for 4, and you can regenerate it. Granted, it's a tad expensive to do that, but regeneration is very powerful and can be very relevant. But what's really interesting is whenever a creature blocks, that creature's controller loses 1 life. There could be attacks going on that have nothing to do with you, and you can reap the benefit of hurting the opponent even more because this card is out. I find that very intriguing and actually very fun in multiplayer. Duretti, Ingenious Iconoclast. Now this, of course, is a new card. It's a Rakdos card, and this one's a real deal, folks. We had Dak Faden in the last Conspiracy, which was kind of the Planeswalker that crossed over into Vintage. This is going to be that card in this set. This is Vintage playable. This is Legacy playable. I think it will be better in Vintage, though, much like Dak Faden, because it interacts so well with artifacts. It's going to have an advantage there. This is good in Commander. This is good in Cubes. This will be awesome in Cubes. And this will be good in the limited format as well. Any format you can play this in, I think it's going to be good. Look at these stats. I mean, it only costs 3, and that's pretty awesome to begin with. 3 loyalty. It can defend itself by making a 1/1 colorless construct, even if it is just a defender. But then at the same time, you can then sacrifice artifacts, including that construct, to destroy artifacts or creatures. And then the ultimate, you can pick any artifact in any graveyard or on the battlefield and make 3 copies of it. That's awesome. So all the different things you can do with that. I mean, you can make artifact creatures and just make 3 of them. You could take mana rocks and just have your mana base explode. There's just so many options. You could probably think of some really amazing combos, but because of its interactions with artifacts and how powerful it is, and you have things like Moxes and Vintage that you play on turn 1 and might not need after turn 3 or 4, yeah, you know what? This could be incredibly good. So watch out for this one. I think this one's going to be the real deal. I'm very excited to see what kind of impact this card has, much like Dak Faden had from the last Conspiracy set. Farika's Mender. This is the last card of the day. It's a reprint. This is the lone Golgari card, and it's okay. It's nothing to write home about at 5, but you get a 4/3, and you do get to return something from the graveyard. In this case, either an enchantment or a creature will go back to your hand. So there is value to be had here for sure. It's actually not a bad card, but it is competing with some good stuff at the 5-drop. So it might not always make your cut, but I think it's very, very playable. And having said that, those are all the cards in black in Conspiracy Take the Ground, and some of the multicolor as well. So we'll be back tomorrow. We're going to look at the red cards and a few more multicolor cards, and then we'll look at green on Friday, and finally we'll wrap things up Saturday morning with all the colorless spells. So as always, hey, thanks for watching. Please remember to like and subscribe, and have a great day. Hey, thanks as always for watching. This video, like all my videos, was made possible by the generous support of viewers like you on Patreon. Even a donation of $1 helps me to keep growing this community and creating better quality content for all of you. Check out our Patreon page for exclusive giveaways and future goals for the channel. If you haven't yet had a chance to subscribe, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss any of the MTG news, spoilers, set reviews, product openings, or finance videos on Heroes and Legends. Talk to you again soon, and have a great day.